Celebrating the little victories. So there's 4 passengers on a plane. Engine conks out. And they find out there's only 3 parachutes. First guy jumps up and goes, "I am a world-class heart surgeon. The world needs me. My patients need me." Grabs a parachute and jumps. Second guy jumps up and goes, "I am a rocket scientist, one of the smartest people on the planet. The world needs me." Grabs a parachute and jumps. Old rabbi, turns to the young man who's left and says, "My son, I've lived a very long life. It's been a good life. You take the parachute and jump." Young man goes, "Don't worry about it, Rabbi. The smartest man in the world just jumped with my knapsack." Let's say this together. I am open to the evolution of my soul. My mind is alert. My heart is receptive. My next step is here and now. And so it is. So I want to talk to you today about little victories. Lots of times we have a dream. We haven't achieved that dream. We have a diagnosis. We don't feel like we're getting any better. We've lost our job. We're job hunting, but nothing's coming about. And so we're not celebrating anything because we think things are so bad. Well, I'm here to tell you that the key to building the life of your dreams is to celebrating every little victory that occurs. Every little thing that happens, no matter how small it might be. It could be that you have a diagnosis, but before you didn't have a diagnosis, so at least now you know what you're dealing with. Find the good. It could be that you been looking for a job, but haven't found the job you want yet. Well, look at all the jobs that you know aren't for you. Find the good. The key here is to constantly look for what we can find because it feeds what it is we want. Remember, what we teach here is what we focus on, we give power to. So what we focus on is really important. And if what we're focused on is what we don't have, then we're giving power to that, then creating what it is we don't want. A friend of mine, her husband had surgery. And one day, the recuperating was happening slow. And so one day he sits up in bed. And my friend goes, "Woohoo! You sat up in bed." Calls the kids, goes, "He sat up in bed." And everybody's like, "What? What's the big deal? He sat up in bed." But she knew that celebrating that little victory added to the healing, moved things forward. And, by doing that with every step of the way, every little thing that occurred, calling the kids, celebrating, telling them, "Woohoo, this is fantastic," he actually healed faster than doctor said he would. Because it has power. It has tremendous power when we put forth that which is what we focus on. Elderly woman comes to church one day, and the minister goes up to her and says, "How are you doing?" Because he'd heard she'd had a stroke. And she's like, "I'm here. I may still have needed somebody to drive me. I may be using this walker, but I am here." She didn't complain about what wasn't working. She stayed strong in what was. And it wasn't less than a month later, she showed up again without that walker. Because when we focus on the little victories, we are giving them power. And when we celebrate them, we're giving them superpower. Have you ever seen a rocket? A rocket can only get off the ground with rocket fuel. And it burns a tremendous amount of that fuel in the first foot of getting off the ground. I got to see this recently, just how slowly it blows out all this tremendous amount of fuel to just get it started. And it comes up off the ground just a tiny bit so slowly, throwing out all this fuel. And then finally gets up a little bit more, throwing out all this incredible high octane stuff. Until finally, it starts to move and take off. This is the way our dreams work. This is the way what it is we want works when we celebrate it. When we celebrate it, it's like using rocket fuel. When we do our treatment work, what we call here affirmational prayer, we call treatment. When we do that, when we focus in that kind of power, we are using rocket fuel. You know, big dreams do not occur when all we do is live as if. When all we do is the normal stuff. If you want big stuff to happen, you've got to focus in on the celebrating of the little tiny steps. When I wrote my book, Cliff Notes on the Science of Mind textbook, I started out knocking out chapters, and so after every single chapter, I went out and celebrated, which gave me that fuel to keep going to do the next chapter. Now, I ran into some chapters that did not come about so easily. And so I found that I needed to lessen where I celebrated. So if I wrote 3 pages in a day, I went out and celebrated. And that got me to then celebrate the next day. By doing this, after I met Ash, I was writing this book when we first met. She started doing this celebration thing with me, and with her support and with all this celebrating, I wound up finishing that book 3 months before I had planned to. Even though it looked like in the middle, when things slowed down to a crawl, like that thing might never get done. That's what's possible when we celebrate, when we feed something with the kind of energy that we're looking to feed it with. What we focus on, we give power to. I'm a milestone guy. I love to think about what new has occurred. I've been doing this for decades and decades and decades. I'm always looking for what has happened that hasn't happened before. Like on our recent vacation. That was a vacation like none other I'd ever taken before. And so I celebrate, but it doesn't have to be something that large. Sometimes it's as simple as Ash will say something to me that she's never said before. And I'm really, grateful that that's finally present in our relationship. Or I'll say something, or how I respond to something I'm upset about may be not perfect, but was a slight bit different than the way I had responded to it before. And I noticed that. And the thing that I've noticed most is the amount of milestones I have in my life. What we focus on, we give power to. And since I constantly focus on milestones, I have lots of them happen on a regular basis. I rarely go a week without something happen in my life that has never happened before. And I make sure I catch it, and I make sure I celebrate it. And by doing so, I watch how my life continues to grow and rise. That's what's possible with what we're doing around here. And so if you're feeling like a failure, what about failure? Failure is something that only appears to be that way. Failure is never actually the case. It's what we are wording it. And you don't really want to word something as failure. You want to word it, you want to see it and celebrate it for the learning experience it is. That's what Thomas Edison did. This man was dead set on creating the light bulb. And we all know the story how he failed 1,000 times. But what you may not know is that during that time he kept failing, which he kept saying, okay, I learned another. He was a big celebrator. He loved celebrating his learning experiences. Every newspaper around the country was making fun of him, was putting him down, was sending out notices over any way they could saying, what a ridiculous man to continually go after doing something that is clearly impossible given how many times he has tried. The whole country turned against him. Here he'd invented all this other stuff, but once they heard how many times he had gone after the light bulb and failed, they turned on him. And so after he invented the light bulb, all these newspaper men who had been making fun of him, putting him down, came to his laboratory to ask him, what do you think about this? What do you think about how people treated you during the time you were working on all these different ways that the light bulb didn't work till you finally got it? And instead of saying a single word to them, he just walked over to the wall, turned on a switch, and the light bulb went on. That's what's possible for each and every one of us. I don't know about you, but I have voices that go around in my head like those reporters who make fun of some of the goals I want to go after, who tell me how crazy I am for thinking I can achieve what it is I want to achieve. And it's up to me to then say, that's not what I'm going to respond to. You know, people talk about, oh, you're looking at a glass half full or half empty, right? But it's actually really important to do that. It's really important to see the glass half full. Imagine yourself working so hard, you got the glass to half and then started focusing on empty. It's half empty. Which direction is your rocket fuel then going in? By focusing on half full and celebrating the half full, even if it's a 16th full, even if it's a 32nd full. You're concentrating on the word full. You are adding rocket fuel to getting it the rest of the way. That's what's possible. That's what Thomas Edison did time and time again. That's what my friend did with her husband time and time again. It didn't matter whether it was a 64th. They celebrated it. I mean, you know, to do it 1,000 times means he was celebrating every 1,000th before he got there. But he did. He made a point of it, of every single time saying, I have learned something new now about what won't work. Imagine if we approached our lives that way. Every time you go on a job interview, you say, that you don't get, you go, there is another job that is not mine. That means I'm closer to the one that is. You imagine the power of that, of putting your attention and time in that kind of direction. It also helps dramatically when we cut what we're doing, like I did with my book, down to smaller and smaller slivers to celebrate. There's a story about a Hall of Fame basketball player named Moses Malone. And when Charles Barkley first came into the league, he was mentored by Moses Malone. And the first thing Moses said to him is you're overweight. You can't play at your top game here. You need to lose 10 pounds. So Charles, loving his mentor, went out, worked really, really hard, and lost those 10 pounds. He came back, and Moses and him went out and celebrated big time that he'd lost those 10 pounds. Then Moses looks at him again and goes, okay, now lose another 10 pounds. And so Charles went out and did it again, lost another 10 pounds, came back, and they celebrated again. This went on 6 more times. Charles told this story at Moses' memorial, how he sent him out 8 times to lose 10 pounds a pop. And then, after he had lost 80 pounds, Moses said, now you're at your playing weight. You're going to be a great player. And Charles said to him, why didn't you just say 80 pounds to begin with? And Moses said, because you would have been overwhelmed. It would have been too big. You would have never done it. But by chopping it into 10-pound blocks, I knew you could take it on and get her done as long as we kept celebrating. That's how it can work for us. If you feel something in your life feels too daunting, slice it up. I do all the time. I slice things into smaller and smaller pieces until they're edible, until I know that doesn't feel overwhelming. And in doing so, get to actually experience what it is I want to experience in life, which is to feel successful. Isn't that what we all want? To feel successful? Sometimes you got to slice things up. I want to tell you right now that rocket fuel, the kind of stuff that gets that up, that celebration spirit, really takes diving in, slicing up, and constantly looking for the good. It doesn't matter what the diagnosis is, what your finances are, what circumstance you're in. There are victories there to be found. I heard the story about these two sisters, 15 and 6, in Rwanda during the genocide. Their parents hid them when the troops came to wipe out their town. They were in hiding 100 days. And every day, what kept them going was the fact that they had each other, that they had enough food and water to survive. As outside of where they were hiding, they are listening to their town being decimated with bullets. The cries of the people dying. 100 days. But they helped each other not get discouraged and stay alive. After the 100 days, they couldn't find their parents. They didn't know whether they were alive or dead. So they snuck out of the town and got to a refugee camp. For the next 6 years, they bounced around through refugee camps, just barely surviving. Telling each other every day, we have each other, we're still alive. We have enough food and water to make it. After 6 years, they had a miracle happen where they were able to immigrate to America. So they get here. But they don't have any job and they have no money. And so to keep them off the streets, the oldest sister, who is now 21, gets a job cleaning. And the younger sister, after school, comes and helps her every day. Again, celebrating those little victories each step of the way. Constantly focusing on that they're still alive, that they're making it, and they never gave up hope around their parents. So they're constantly taking every extra bit of money they have and using it to call and search Rwanda without actually going there because they didn't have that kind of money. After a few years, they found their parents in Rwanda, but they didn't have the money to see them. So all they could do was talk on the phone. When 12 years had passed, the youngest daughter enters a writing contest in high school. Turns out that writing contest was sponsored by Oprah. And that writing that girl did wound up in her hand. And she was so moved that on live TV, she flew in her parents and had them reunited. And then set them up so they could live, so they could make it in America. They started out just surviving in Rwanda. But because of the little victories that they kept focused on, kept moving them forward, until all of a sudden they're on Oprah with their parents reunited. There is no end to what's possible, no matter how big the circumstance is. It doesn't matter how big it is. What matters is what's possible. And what's possible is what we focus on. The little victories are rocket fuel. Use this rocket fuel to blast your life to the stars. Use this rocket fuel, celebrate those little victories. And you too can have amazing things happen in your life. I love you. Take out what you're going to give and hold it in your hand. Do not fold it up. Do not crumple it up. This is power. This is presence. This is as much God as everything else. This is how you move forward. This is how you create that law of circulation. It goes round and round and round. So you do not want to crumple this up. You want to hold it for the power it is. And let's say our affirmation together. God is the source of all supply. Money is God in action. What we give, we receive multiplied abundantly. All that God is, I am. And so it is.